Hello once again, everyone. Welcome back. So in the previous video, we set up our blend space, which allows our character to blend between our idle, our walk, and our run animation. In this video, we are actually going to take a quick look at animation blueprints before we start actually working with them. I promise this video will be really short. So let's continue and get a quick overview of animation blueprints, and we shall continue with our project. So first thing that we're going to do, let's go ahead and close the blend space if you still have it up. I realized that we did not save it yet in the previous video, so go ahead and make sure that you save all your assets inside the content browser here. So click Save All and click Yes. If you have any other things that you need to save to, go ahead and save those. And to create our animation blueprint, we're actually going to hop over to the Character folder. So inside the Character folder, I'm going to right-click and scroll up to Animation. And the third one down, Animation Blueprint. Go ahead and select that. And it's going to give us a new dialog box here. Now it's going to ask us for a parent class to use for the purposes of this animation blueprint. There's a couple of different options here. 99.9% of the time you're going to want to use the anim instance unless you're working with vehicles or tutorials, etc. But for us, anim instance is fine. Then it's asking us to choose a skeleton. We only have the one, so we're going to go ahead and select that. And then we're going to hit OK. Now this is going to create the asset for us inside the content browser, and we're going to rename it actually. Let's rename it to Character Anim BP, like so. And let's quickly just save all again to get rid of that asterisk. Okay, let's go ahead and double click on it to open it up, and that will open the animation blueprint inside Persona. And it'll also give us that fourth tab that we talked about earlier on in the series, the Graph tab. So now we have the Graph tab inside Persona, which is for animation blueprints. We have our Animation tab, we have our Mesh tab, and our Skeleton tab. So let's hop back to the Graph tab really quickly. I'll give you a quick introduction to the various windows and components of animation blueprints. Probably first and foremost is this large area here for the graph. If you are familiar with blueprints at all, if you've worked with blueprints, this should look vaguely similar to you because the systems are very much married together. So if you've worked with blueprints, you should feel right at home in here. There are some subtle changes that we'll talk about as we get deeper into the system, but I do want to mention that we have two tabs inside the graph here. We have the anim graph and the event graph. Now notice we don't have a construction script like we do in blueprints. We only have the event graph and the anim graph. That's probably the biggest difference between this and blueprints, is that that third tab for the construction script doesn't apply here. We'll talk about what these do in a moment here. Let me get through the rest of the interface here. In the upper left here, we have a viewport, which kind of gives us an idea of what our character is doing, the animations that they're playing as we start to make updates inside the graph here. Below that, we have the anim preview editor. And what this will allow us to do is any variables that we have in here. For instance, we're going to have a speed setting in here, which determines how fast our character is moving and whether they're walking, running, or idling. We can adjust that value here and kind of see how it plays out on our character in the viewport up here. And there's some other settings that you can toggle on and off, such as jumping or crouching or reloading if you had that in your game. But we'll get to those a little bit later. In the center bottom down here, we have the My Blueprint tab, which is very similar to the My Blueprint tab inside of the regular Blueprint editor. But then we also have the Asset Browser tab, and that contains all of our animations, which we can just drag and drop into our anim graph here to populate it with animations for our character to use. On the bottom on the far right here, we have the Details panel. The tab is actually hidden, but I can click this little check mark here to expose the tab. You can also hide it by right-clicking on it and choosing Hide Tab. But the Details panel allows us to change some of the properties and settings of some of our variables or nodes that we place inside of our graph here. So hopping back up to the anim graph, I wanted to explain the two differences for this really quickly before we close out this video. First of all, let's talk about the event graph and what it does. Now you see there's already some nodes here that are kind of grayed out. These are probably two of the more common nodes that you'll use in this graph, so they're here by default to help get you started. And then we can right click to create new nodes. Now the event graph is where most of our updating is going to be occurring. Essentially what the event graph does is processes data, incoming data, so that speed variable that we talked about. This is where the updating of that variable would occur, is inside this graph. We would get information from the player character to determine how they're moving, if they're standing still, etc. And then take that into the event graph and update another variable, which we will call speed for the sake of clarity, that will drive the animations that our character is going to be using. And those animations are actually going to be handled on the anim graph. Now, the anim graph is basically used for poses. When I say pose, I mean the actual pose that your character is doing from moment to moment, frame to frame during gameplay. That is all handled inside the anim graph. This is actually going to be a good opportunity to set up the next video, because this is where you do your state machines, is inside the anim graph. And with that, let's actually pause here because I want to separate those two topics out. In the next video, we are going to dive into state machines and give you an overview of what state machines are, if you are not familiar with them, before we start editing our state machine. That will make things easier for us once we start to do so. So we're about 6.5 minutes in. Let's go ahead and wrap this video up. This was an introduction to animation blueprints. In the next video, we will start talking about state machines and how we will put together our own state machine. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.